Greetings. May I take your purse, as you will, or for the first time? Honestly, if you haven't seen The Birdcage this year, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. For those of you who have no idea what you're doing here, my name's Joe. I am a mediocre dungeon master, and I am walking you through how I design a campaign in order to make very good use of the Strongholds and Followers rules put out by MCDM pretty recently after their tremendously successful Kickstarter. I have heard that people on YouTube like it when you put your face in the video. So I've got my face in the video, and I know what you're thinking. You're like, thank the gods that there is another, pasty white guy talking about D&D on the internet, because there aren't enough. There are just clearly never enough. Sadly, this is all I've got for you. So as soon as I figure out how to transcend that, I'll let you know. So, if you're not sure where we picked up last time, I will stick a link to the other video and the blog post, the last blog post, and also this most recent blog post, this one in the doobly-doo. You can take a look at that. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time backtracking, but where we were last time, we had decided that we've got this sort of Malachite kingdoms. There are three groups of people there: the Ling people, the Klitu people, and the Sompef people, who I think I'm going to take to calling something else, Islanders, Island folk, something like that, because Sompef is really hard to just, I have to keep copying and pasting it because it's got these like ridiculous little, I could take them out, but I'm stubborn that way. And one thing that I was thinking about today, and I think is really kind of great, is that I think there's sort of like three pillars of Malachite culture. And I like the idea that those three pillars of Malachite culture come from each one of these groups of people. So the first is family, which comes from the Klitu people. Very family-oriented group of people. The second and third are honor and ambition. And my initial thought was that maybe honor was sort of pushed by the Ling people, and then ambition would have come from the Sompef people as some sort of a tribal war kind of thing. But it just kind of felt too stale and tired, so I flipped it. So my thought is, we flip it. The Ling people are known for their great ambition, and then the Sompef people for their honor, which I think is a good. It's not like contrived or anything. It feels kind of at least a little bit more interesting. I broke these groups up into reasonable little chunks, with sort of two big chunks on that main long island for the Ling people, and then one chunk on that northernly island. The Klitu people I broke up into many small family groups, and just sort of in a way that seemed reasonable for borders to be set. Original, these are oldie-timey borders. And then for the Sompef people, I basically just grouped them by islands, which was, it led me to an interesting discovery. The Sompef people are islanders. They travel a lot, they fish a lot, they travel from island to island, and I like this idea that their concept of honor, which in their language is called mapuk, it's honorable, but whatever, their concept of honor is about these islands. The idea, initially from the idea that you defend the island that you're on. The island that you are on is your home. If you're working there, if you're living there, it's your home. And if you're defending it against people from an island that used to be your home, that is considered honorable. To fight in defense of the people who are now your people against the people who used to be your people. And that is a thing that they would consider to be honorable. At some point in time in the near future, I'm going to do a whole video on honor. I'm going to discuss what the modern Malachite kingdoms consider to be honorable, because you can't just say honor and run with it. Every culture in the world has a different idea of what is honorable. Here in the U.S., honor means one thing. If you were in if you're in Japan, if you're in Thailand, if you're in China, it means something different. If you're in the Middle East, it often means something very different. And African cultures honors very different. Totally ignoring any conversations about right and wrong and good and evil. There's a huge variety in what various cultures consider to be honorable behavior. And so we're going to have to figure out what these Malachite people, and there will eventually be a different name for them, what they consider to be honorable behavior, because it may be very different than what we consider to be honorable behavior. And I don't think it needs to be complicated. I think it's going to be, just a couple of points, something not too different than a Bushido code or something like that. Give the players a lot of meat to chew on without overly complicating their lives. So that is my starting point. As you can see down here, I just sort of created a bunch of these chunks. I named them, and it wasn't in a complicated way. I sort of just looked through the dictionaries, found some words that looked good. So the large northern island is called Homping, which is a net in the Ling language. The top of the longish island is called Yuhaka, which is sort of an all of the people. Toi Kuso down there at the bottom is a gathering to survive the cold. And then we have this one teeny island sort of just off to the east of that called Hihahaka, which is an island of the people, a sister state to Yuhaka. The Klitu groups down here, I think these are family groups. I think you're looking at area controlled by families, clans, that kind of thing. And they're just named after neat ideas: dew, pillar, wedge, the people of the wind, the people of the oyster, the people of the earth, that kind of stuff. Nothing really complicated. All the fun stuff happened when I started naming Sompef islands. Because we learned some interesting things about the Sompef people. For example, this here, and is Shashuaksu. This is literally the grandfather island. So now we know that islands are predominantly male. The idea of them is male. I think I like ships being female and islands being male. That's really interesting. It has absolutely no basis in cultural biology, but we'll run with it. What I really like about this, though, and I just liked the word for grandfather more than the word for grandmother. It just sounded better, ran with it, give you some insight into the way my mediocre brain works. But what I thought would be neat is all the rest of these islands are named after how they discovered them. So we have, for example, the first island discovered here is Yanfaki. This is a pretty easy island. It is literally visible from the coast. The second island discovered here is this Oya, and it is, I like the idea that it is sort of named for, or there's a story about a wanderer who took off in a ship in a completely different direction, one of the very early boats, so it wasn't very good sailing conditions, and they found this other island. And if need be, I could have a whole story based around that. And then we've got, people following the sun, the blue moon, the red, yellow, purple stars, which are the stars in the night sky in Pfeiffer. There's a lot of them. They are very brightly colored. Some of them are much more bright than the stars that we have in our sky here on Earth. They also, interestingly, don't really. They're not quite as migratory as ours because there aren't planets, so there's less of them moving. It's more just stars in the background. We don't get a lot of seasonal movement out of the stars in Pfeiffer because it is geocentric. So, and then we have a couple of these that are just sort of randomly named. The hill and the fish. There was a faraway island, which I thought was a starvation journey. That faraway island is right next to Yuhaka. So after that, they run away to this flight island where it's not too far away, and they run away and go there and probably spend a long time staging a takeover of this Shene island. We have the calm of summer. Basically, someone made a long trip when it was warm and calm down south. I mean, you got to bear in mind, we're in the southern hemisphere here. Some of these islands get cold. The further south you go, the colder it gets. It doesn't get Finland cold, but maybe it gets, it doesn't get like South Pole cold, but it probably gets Greenland cold. One of the islands is named after the Roar volcano. For some reason, this is just sitting in the dictionary, this Keep the Yanak, which is a gay bed. So I thought it would be nice if we had a story about like two men seeking a place where they could live in peace. So that tells us that the Sompeth people were not always okay with homosexuality. Maybe they're not now. Maybe there's a cultural stigma there, and that'll be really interesting to think about. So we've got a ton of these sort of islands named, and all I did after that was I just plopped them right on the map here. There's not in any real particular order. Some of the islands I gave some consideration to their naming conventions, but really I just sort of flopped them down. These Kletu things I literally just put wherever I liked them, and that's it. That's it. They're all on there. So now, and this is still the old timey map. This is the original map. What I am tempted to do now is talk about battles. For example, I would love to talk to think about how how the Sompef people reclaimed this island from Yuhaka and the battle that took place there, and that other stuff. I mean, we know that at a certain point in time, Nuarta here is going to be taken by the Ling people, and that they are going to push these other groups out and sort of shove away some of their linguistic capabilities and stuff like that. But I don't want to go there yet because we still have to deal with the other races, the other species, and there's a lot to unpack there. I don't know how much of that I'm gonna get through, but let's talk about it. So we've got the humans here. We have the Ling and the Kletu and the Islanders, which I think, what is that? Yahi. Yahi means sailing folk. Yahi people sounds a lot easier to say than Sompef people all the time. So I might just stick with that. So let's talk elves. So elves in Fife come from the Feywilds. Almost all of the species here that are not humans come from other planes in one degree or another, other realms, and have sort of migrated to the prime material plane and become viable. So we talked a little bit last time about these species: dwarves, elves, halflings, goblins. I don't want to go with ogres as like a PC race, but I think I want them to be common enough that we should talk about them. Tiefling and Dragonborn. There's other races that have come out since the inception of 5th edition, Nasamar and Genocide and all that other nonsense. Tortle. The vast majority of it just doesn't appeal to me in any way. I thought kind of briefly about bringing in hobgoblins, but I can't realistically think of a situation where I would want a PC hobgoblin where a PC orc or half orc would not suffice. I like goblins, and I think they work out really well, especially as sort of a cultural nemesis to halflings, sort of pit these two tiny races against each other. Rock'em sock'em robots. So we'll see how that goes. I hope that the video quality of my webcam is not as terrible as it looks in the corner here, but I suspect it is. So we're just going to have to deal with that. Maybe if I keep doing these and people like them, maybe I'll grab myself a camera that doesn't suck. But this is the one I have. This is literally the manliest glass bottle in the house. So let's talk elves and dwarves and halflings, and let's bear in mind that there are a few goals here. The first, the meta goal, is to type as little as possible because I've discovered that it makes a lot of noise in these videos. Sorry about that. But my first goal is to make these species as much as possible playable by PCs without huge limitations. I don't want it to be a situation where I've got a 36-page DM binder and I'm like, oh, well, if you would like to play an elf in my game, you're going to have to go through the Trials of Akhmud, and here's your Staff of Sunshine and your Cape of the Woe-Begotten, and you're going to have to know what all that stuff is, and you better be able to recite your lineage back 35 generations. That sucks. But part of the reason we're playing in my setting and not in the Forgotten Realms is to engage in the setting, is to have a different experience. And there is a happy medium. There's a balance to be maintained there between too much difference and not enough difference to make it worth playing in my setting. I'm going to try really hard to edit out the vast majority of my ums and ers, but they're just in my speech. I've been working to get rid of them, and they are difficult to get rid of. So, what do we know about elves? We have two kinds of elves in the player's handbook. We have high elves and we have the sort of wild elves. In my setting, those are, generally speaking, they're called the wild elves. The woodsy ones are called seed elves or root elves, and the other elves are called sky elves, is it? Let's check because I always get this wrong. Seed elves and sky elves. That's what we've got. So the elven culture is usually based around what is called a vale. That is to say, they build their cities in a place where there is a path to the Feywild, some sort of sacred space for them. It is not, that's not all their cities, that's just the main settlements. There will be, farms and trade posts and whatever, but they'll have big settlements there. The same way that humans build their cities on rivers and waterways, elves build their cities in vales. So far, what I have established is that the sort of highish elves are pacifists, and the seed elves are more standard elfy, more warlike, more wild elves. That does make the sky elves tricky to play. In a standard game, I often recommend to people that they, if that doesn't appeal to them, if the challenge of playing a character who is a pacifist and who does not believe in killing sentient beings, if that doesn't appeal to you, then maybe play a half-elf or play some sort of a weird renegade. Just understand that you're going to be perceived as an outsider by your own species, and I don't think that's a problem for most players. It's never been a problem. I think in a game like this, where a substantial amount of the challenge is going to be sort of secondhand violence, if you will, leading armies and things, an elf in the right mindset could fairly easily say, well, I am a pacifist, but my soldiers are not. This is going to be pretty dependent upon what the players are interested in playing. But I think they can make that work. And moreover, courtly intrigue, spying, it's all going to be a really big part of what's going on. So I think we can make this work. I have also been toying with the idea of elevating the status of half-elves. Half-elves are traditionally sort of an outsider race. But in 5th edition, I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but they kind of are awesome. Has anybody noticed that half-elves are awesome? What's the deal with whole milk? In a lot of fiction, half-elves are sort of this, sort of lower caste, spat upon, looked down upon group of beings. Thank you, Tanis Half-Elven, for that. But wouldn't it be neat if the people of the Malachite kingdoms believed that the half-elves sort of inherited the best of both of their parent species? If they gained some of the greatness of the elves, they gained some of the greatness of the humans, and instead of being seen as less than, if they had some sort of an elevated status. If that is the case, do elves need a lower status? Do elves need to be untrustworthy? Do elves need to be seen as outsiders? I haven't decided yet. But I think there's something there. So let's say for a start, half elves seen as sort of having the best traits of both parents. Does that mean that a half elf is a legitimate heir? Probably. If I were writing a novel, it would be interesting to play the fine line between half elves being seen as elevated, but also not being legitimate heirs for the various families or clans or whatever we end up with. That would be a really neat distinction to make, but I have a gut feeling that in a role-playing game it's not going to be a fun distinction to make if you are an elf PC who you know reproduces with a human NPC or a human PC, or vice versa, and or however you do it. And I don't think you're going to be, after going to all the trouble of having a relationship and and a family and a marriage and an heir. I don't think you're going to want to be told by the DM, oh, sorry, your heir stinks. So I think let's just leave it at that. So let's say that it would be interesting if, right? So think of high elves, sky elves, if you prefer. I do, as outsiders, but highly regarded outsiders, right? Um, they are experts in the fields of magic, and they understand the sort of twists and turns of nature. Uh, their memories are particularly long, and if there's one thing the Malachite kingdoms are interested in, I think it's history. History is very important to these people. Lineage is very important to these people. Doing business with a guy who did business with your great great grandfather is going to be seen as particularly honorable, I would think. So that's a good thing to start with. And so for that reason, you could almost paint it as some sort of a cultural fetish. Maybe we don't need to throw that word around just yet. By default, then, or by contrast, let's say seed elves are less trusted outsiders. Why would that be? I think it is because the emperor does not control the Veils. He has a ton of resources at his disposal. Maybe he could stomp the elves if he chose, but for whatever reason doesn't. Maybe I'll come up with a reason. But if the emperor doesn't control the Veils, and the seed elves do, then there's a conflict there. There's an interesting conflict to start with. Do we trust these people? Do we not trust these people? They have denied the emperor in the past, and that's not good. That's dishonorable. So that they've automatically got to strike against them. It is an inherent conflict between the seed elves and the sky elves. I like it, and it makes for interesting roleplay possibilities for half elves whose parents are seed elves, because you kind of look just like regular half elves. Do you tell people that? Do you lie to people and say that your parents are sky elves? Do you create that sort of fabrication for yourself? I'm interested. I'm interested already, so I think that's good. And that isn't too much. I don't think that is too much. It's flavor without, completely changing everything. So let's talk dwarves. One of the things we said last time, and I think I'm going to stick with it, is that the mountain dwarves. So the mountain dwarves live in the deeps, possibly even in the Underdark. So the Underdark in my world is essentially another realm of existence. The Underdark is what we call it when the realm of Earth, the plane of Earth, bleeds into the prime material plane. That area where they sort of shift into one another is called the Underdark. The place where caves become portals to another realm, and the sort of place where you can find your standard Underdark stuff, your Umber Hulks, your Drow Kingdoms, your Zorn crapping diamonds the size of your head, that kind of thing. That is a thing that happened. I feel like I should apologize to my players, but they really loved that Zorn turd. Maybe the mountain dwarves live in the Underdark. Makes them more difficult to affect with magic. We haven't really talked about magic yet, and I'm not going to yet, but it makes them more difficult to affect with magic. It makes it pretty hard to get armies there. I mean, if the Underdark is attached to the prime material plane by a cave, you can't just shove an army through a cave, opening readily, especially when the dwarves are such master stoneworkers. Does that limit them as a PC race? Well, If they are immediately distinguishable from hill dwarves, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. So what we need is some other aspect of this, right? So, I mean, this is easy, I guess. You just pretend they're people, right? Now we have some dwarves who are loyal to the emperor. Maybe they have what I really should have done. I'm going to do it right now. Stand by. Okay, we're back. Boring stuff done. So some clans of mountain dwarves have left that realm and pledged fealty to the emperor, and it's as simple as that. Those are the good guys. The other mountain dwarves are the bad guys. Mountain dwarves are not going to be trusted very, very strongly. They will probably face some discrimination. But I don't think that's a problem. I think that stuff's just role play, you know. And if you don't want to play one of those, if you don't want to face that discrimination, then you can play yourself a hill dwarf. I imagine there are plenty of hill dwarves who are acting as sort of spies and middlemen, you know, double agents, because that is going to be an interesting part of the game. What else do we need to know about hill dwarves going into this? Is there anything about them that is unique, that is going to make them interesting in this particular setting as opposed to another one? I don't have anything yet. I mean, the hill dwarf is going to be the default dwarf for this part of the world, unless you're playing a mountain dwarf, and then you will be maybe occasionally weed on. Let's talk halflings. That pause lasted a little bit longer than I thought. My wife brought Taco Bell. So we were talking about halflings, and honestly, I just have no reason not to sort of treat them as kind of perfectly normal. But so 5th edition has this sort of weird distinction, you know, between where did this thing go? Basically, like, you know, D&D halflings and hobbitses. Yeah, so we've got Lightfoot and Stout, with Lightfoot being more of like a 3rd edition halfling and Stout being, you know, proud feet. I can't say that the distinction between those two things, it does nothing for me. But we can try to do something with it, right? We can say that the Lightfoot halflings are sort of more common in Ling lands to start with. I've always kind of thought of halflings as like these things that just crop up when you have a human city. Like you have a human city, and then suddenly there's halflings. You just, you know, kind of like sometimes you get cockroaches or rats or whatever, mice, halflings. Who knows where they came from? Who knows? And then we can say that the Stout are more common in Cletu lands, and that gives us a social distinction, at least, between the two kinds of halflings. and it does something else that you never see happen, really. It makes the Lightfoot halfling kind of elevates them a little bit socially. It sort of allies themselves with these Ling people who are sort of a more upward mobility kind of what do you call it? Ethnic group, right? And we haven't really talked at all about what differentiates the Ling from the Cletu. Why they look different? Do they sound different? I don't know. Maybe later. But we've got that. I like the idea of goblins, and I think that the goblins are. So we have the goblins originally among the Yahi people, the ogres. I honestly kind of want them anywhere there's a mountain. Let's take a look at Incarnate here. Where are we more likely to have mountains? I mean, I still feel like up here, Wartakami, Fakati, this kind of area here, we are likely to have mountains. This whole island could be mountainous if we choose, but I feel like doesn't that seem like a small island for ogres? It seems like they want to ramble. So I might, and culturally they make more sense with the Klaatu people. So the Kleetu people, so let's, among the Yahi and the Kleetu, easy enough. Tiefling and Dragonborn. I am torn on. I sort of like the idea that they are created to serve the Emperor. Maybe Dragonborn as his fists, and maybe Tiefling as his eyes and ears. But does that then shoehorn them? It may. It may. So perhaps there were so many Dragonborn and so many Tiefling. I've never really established whether they can breed amongst themselves because they are so few and far between that it never matters in other places. But if they can breed amongst themselves, and if the Malachite Kingdoms has as long a history as it is claimed to have, then perhaps there's a certain type of tiefling, a certain type of dragonborn that serves the Emperor, shall we say, Malachite dragonborn and green-horned tieflings, kind of fit in the theme. And any other kinds are second generation. So if you want to play a character who was created to serve the Emperor, you can do that. And if you don't want to play that character, then you can play a second or third or even fifth generation tiefling dragonborn. Whatever. I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause on it. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to make a few notes, right? So that brings everybody up to speed. What I can do now is add a little bit of detail to this map. Where are there mountains? Where are there volcanoes? More importantly, where are there forests? Where can I find a vale? That sort of stuff. And use that to my advantage. If I know there's a vale, then I know there's elves there. If I know there's mountains there, I know there's ogres, maybe goblins. Certainly I know there's goblinish people out here. Also, those mountains and caves, especially the ones around. I like mountains around here because that gives us dwarves, right? And maybe even creeping down this way. I might look into if there's anybody out there that knows a whole lot about plate tectonics. it might not be a bad idea to talk to one of those people. But this whole area looks geologically active, right? It's got islands and volcanoes. Things got to be moving. There's also a lot of water. So perhaps we could look into the possibility of aquatic species. Maybe not as PCs. I don't care. What is there, like a half Triton or something somewhere? A sea elf. There isn't a sea elf anywhere, but I wouldn't mind having a sea elf if we decide to go that route, although sea elves seem a little silly to me. But given how much water there is, and given how much time will be spent on and around the water in any campaign set here, obviously, that might not be a bad idea. Might not be a bad idea. So let me stew on those two things. There will be a blog post up that contains a lot of the bits and pieces of lore that we've scribbled out, the names and notations of things. Coming soon, coming relatively soon, a discussion on morality, alignment, honor, what those things mean in this culture. There will at some point in time have to be an alignment discussion, whether I intend to use the standard Dungeons and Dragons alignment or whether I intend to use a completely different XY axis. There will be no Z axis. That's way too complicated. But that stuff will occur. Any discussion on alignment is ultimately stupid. Hot take. It's because good and evil's on there. Good and evil's just a very, very old school D&D did not have good and evil, and it was better for it. I like the concepts of good and evil, but man, once you introduce them to the game, you just can't have a talk about alignment. You can't talk about it. Just can't. So, but we will be talking specifically about what those words mean here for these people, not for us, not for anybody else, just for these people. And I think that's good enough. That's good enough. I don't know that I even need a good and evil axis. I think enough of this game is going to be about making. I think enough of this game is going to live in a morally gray area. When you're going to war against people, when you're backstabbing and court politics and all that stuff. I'm not sure that you want hard and fast good and evil. So there may not be good and evil. There may be, a law and chaos alignment, and the XY, no, the Y, the X-axis may be something different. I don't know. But I'll give it some thought, and we will have more in the future. And I swear, very soon, this will look more like something that is going to be a real campaign. Right now, it's a map. It's a map with languages and families and, cute stories about seafaring homosexuals wanting to be left alone, and that's cool. But eventually, it needs to be, how do we turn this into a Dungeons and Dragons game? And we're not there yet, but we're gonna get there. And one of the ways we're gonna get there is by saying, what is it about strongholds and followers that I really like, that I really want to use? How do we integrate that into a D&D game? That's going to be the start of the uphill struggle of pulling us out of the mire and endless muck that is lore, that is the backstory of this setting, because we could do this forever. Literally, I could do this for months and months and months and never have a Dungeons and Dragons game, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do, I swear, the minimum amount of work. This is my process. I don't recommend you use this process. It's a pain in the butt. And if you can just throw together a map, put some funny names on it, and be like, we're adventuring, then do it. Do it. I like having this stuff. I like, for example, knowing how all these islands were named, because the PCs are going to have a stronghold, and maybe that stronghold is going to be on a heretofore unknown island, like, say, out here somewhere. What if they find an island out there? Then we have this precedent where we can say, well, how did you discover it? Come up with a name based on that. That's how this has always been done with islands. There will be a reason behind that, and we can tell these cool stories. Knowing how it's done, picking little bits and pieces out about the culture from these haphazard, accidental stories that we've thrown together, that is the stuff that really helps me as a storyteller. That is the stuff that's like gets my juices flowing, right? I now know things about these cultures. I know new things about these people and the history, and those things can just fiddle their way into roleplay scenes and conversations. And it's not something you have to beat the PCs over the hammer with. Beat the PCs over the hammer. Just gonna beat them right over the hammer with a head over the hammer. This has been my TED Talk.